Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us here this afternoon. It's indeed a great pleasure for me to chair this session and this press conference in which you are going to hear about research that's being done on HIV prevention and treatment in women and girls. We have lined up for you here an amazing array of great science, and the way in which we will manage this session is that each of the speakers will have 3 minutes to give you a quick synopsis of what their research findings show. At the end of all of the presentations, I will give all of you an opportunity to ask questions. I'm going to take one question on each of the studies first, and then if there's time, we'll take a second and third question and so on. But you should not have a problem, because at the end of the session, all of the speakers will be available just outside of the conference room 1 to address any questions or to take any interviews should you require them. So it's my great pleasure to kick off. My name is Salim Karim. I was the scientific chair of the conference in 2000, and it's wonderful to have the conference back here in sunny Durban. And this is our winter, so in case you're confused and you think that this is summertime, this is the worst of our winter, if you want to call it that. So enjoy it, it's an incredible city, and I hope you'll have a chance to see all of its beauty. So in going through this press conference, I think the conference organizers understood and grasped the essential importance of what do we do in dealing with HIV infection in young women. And so the conference itself has several presentations that will focus on this particular group. As you know, about 70% of the global burden of HIV and TB, of new HIV and existing HIV infections occurs in Eastern and Southern Africa. So we know that a very substantial part of the burden is here. And young women particularly have very high rates of HIV infection. So the presentations we're going to hear today in this press conference will focus on that major challenge. Okay, so let me start off with the first of the presentations, which I will be doing about research that will be presented on Tuesday to tomorrow at 2:30 in the special session focusing on new evidence. So we will be presenting 3 studies. The first of those studies looks at what is the underlying phylogenetics that in the HIV that can inform us about transmission dynamics within a community. So we tested some 10,000 odd people from the rural and urban community, and we identified just over 1,500 people who had high viral loads that we could sequence their viruses. We used those genetic codes from individual viruses to put together the clusters of individuals who have the same virus. And we were then able to work out the chains of transmission. And what we learned, what this revealed, is that in these settings, we have a cycle of HIV transmission, which is driven by high incidence rates in young women, where they acquire HIV largely from men who are on average about 8 years older, so men mostly in their 30s. And that those men are acquiring HIV from women in their 30s. Women in their 30s have a very high prevalence of HIV. So in understanding the cycle of HIV transmission, it helps us identify what are the points at which we can most easily intervene. So that gives us a clue as to why young women have so much of HIV exposure. Why are they exposed to so many men who have HIV infection? So what is it about these women that leads them to acquire HIV rapidly? What is it that when they're still very young, they are becoming infected? So we decided to look at that, and we did the sequencing of the bacterial genome in 119 women, and we were looking at which organisms, which bacteria in the vagina were associated with HIV infection. What we found was that one particular bacteria, known as Prevotella vivia, was strongly associated with HIV infection. That women who had Prevotella vivia had a 13 times higher chance of acquiring HIV than those who didn't. We also showed that it was associated with genital inflammation. And one of the important things that emerged is that we found that women who had Prevotella vivia, we found that there was an upregulation of genes that produced a particular immune stimulating molecule that has been well described called lipopolysaccharide, LPS. LPS has been shown to be a very strong immune stimulant that leads to the establishment of HIV infection. And we showed that this Prevotella vivia is leading to the synthesis and secretion of LPS, which is an immune stimulant, attracting CD4 cells, thereby making the vagina more susceptible to acquiring HIV. And finally, if these young women who are at such high risk of exposure and acquisition, if they chose to go onto PrEP, we wanted to better understand what might be influencing the efficacy of PrEP, because we see such variable results. So in this study, we looked at the proteins in 688 women from the original CAPRISA 004 trial. In their vaginal washing, we identified 3,334 different proteins. We were able to assign each of those proteins to a particular bacterium. And what we found in those women, about 60%, where there was a predominance of lactobacilli, they showed reasonable good efficacy from tenofovir. And this is from the gel formulation. In women who did not have lactobacilli dominant, lactobacilli are the ones that produce lactic acid, they lower the pH of the vagina, they make it acidic, and that's the healthy bacteria. In the other 39% of the women who didn't have lactobacilli dominant, they had a wide variety of organisms, but predominantly one called Gardnerella vaginalis. And what we discovered in a set of studies in the laboratory, we found that if we put tenofovir in the culture medium in which we are growing lactobacilli, we show that the lactobacilli have no effect on the tenofovir levels in the culture medium. However, when we do that with Gardnerella vaginalis, we discovered that Gardnerella was rapidly absorbing tenofovir. And what it was doing was it was keeping that tenofovir inside the cell, so there was not enough or very low levels of tenofovir left. After 4 hours, more than half had disappeared, and by 24 hours, the levels of tenofovir were low. So that might explain, it might be one of the reasons why women have to be very strict about maintaining adherence to tenofovir, whether it's the gel or the tablets. And this is part of the thing that this is part of the findings that now need to be confirmed in a range of other studies. So those are the studies we'll be presenting tomorrow. We'll talk about the implications, and what we are trying to do in all of this is to best understand what influences risk, what influences vulnerability, and what influences the benefits from PrEP. On that note, I'd like to move on to our second speaker this morning, and you will now be hearing from Judith, who has done some seminal studies, including a major study that looked at PrEP efficacy in many countries in Southern Africa. So I'm going to not steal his thunder and leave him to explain to you what he's finding. Over to you, Judith.
Thank you, and on behalf of the Aspire study team, I'm very honored to be able to speak at this press conference. Aspire was a phase 3 placebo-controlled trial of the Piperine vaginal ring for HIV prevention, conducted between 2012 and 2015 among 2,600 women in 4 African countries. The primary results of Aspire were presented earlier this year. They found that the Piperine vaginal ring safely reduced the risk of HIV acquisition by about a third overall and by about half among women who were older than 21 years of age. who appear to use the ring with better adherence. Adherence is key to HIV protection. And for oral PrEP, previous studies such as iPreps, iPreps-Delay, and the Partners PrEP study have done exploratory analyses using data from their clinical trial to assess what degree of HIV protection might be achieved with better adherence. The results you'll be hearing tomorrow from the Aspire team present a similar approach. In Aspire, women received a Currier vaginal ring each month. And we used the residual amount of Currier in that ring upon its return a month later to assess the degree of HIV protection with greater use. Because less Currier should mean more use. We did a series of analyses because there's no established cutoff for what may achieve high protection with this Currier vaginal ring yet. And we took into account different cutoffs as well as the amount of time the ring had been dispensed. Across all of these analyses, we found that there was greater HIV protection, statistically significantly so, with greater use. From a 56% reduction in HIV risk in some analyses to a 75% or more reduction among those with high use in some of the analyses. We saw evidence of a dose-response relationship, with no use having no HIV protection, but rising to high protection with high use. So in this population, in which important risk factors for HIV acquisition like genital inflammation, STIs, bacterial vaginosis, and progesterone-based contraception are common, we found among those with high use, HIV incidence could be reduced to 1% per year or less, compared to over 4.5% among those who had assigned placebo. These results suggest that the Currier vaginal ring, when used with high adherence, could provide significant protection against HIV. The results are extremely encouraging as we move forward with next studies for the Currier vaginal ring. And in fact, an open label study of the ring called HOPE, which is providing the ring to women who have participated in Aspire, opened just today here at the site in Durham. And that study will assess what uptake, use, and adherence is for women who have provided this ring now that it's been demonstrated to be safe and effective for prevention against HIV. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judith.
Is that fine? Yeah.
So that was Dr. Jared Baeten from the University of Washington sharing with you some exciting analyses that show that residual levels of dipivridine correlate with higher levels of protection from the dipivridine ring. So wonderful news. Let's go on next to Dr. Zeda Rosenberg. Zeda is a long-standing colleague, friend, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the International Partnership on Microbicides, has led the way in terms of the development of the dipivridine ring, and I'm going to call on her to share with us her comments. Over to you, Zeda.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of IPM, the International Partnership for Microbicides, it's an honor to be here to speak at the conference about the urgent need to expand HIV prevention options for women and girls. IPM developed the dipivridine ring because we saw an unmet need for long-acting HIV prevention methods that women can use discreetly. The results of the 2 phase 3 trials of the ring announced earlier this year underscored that need, because in those trials, the women in the placebo arms had up to 6% infection rates. And that means that the paradigm for which we have looked at for current HIV prevention needs to change. And that if it doesn't change, more than half of the women in the communities where these studies took place would likely become HIV infected in the next 10 years. So make no mistake, the critically important and ambitious goal of ending AIDS is possible only if we do a much better job of preventing new infections, especially among those at greatest risk, women and girls. And there will be no one-size-fits-all solution to the epidemic. We're only going to reduce infections by offering multiple options that fit into women's lives. And so it's very encouraging to see new technologies like oral PrEP moving forward, and hopefully the monthly dipivridine ring. Jared's analyses, the exploratory analyses of the dipivridine ring announced today, add to the body of evidence that it may be highly protected against HIV when used consistently, and it supports the ring as a potential important method as part of the HIV prevention response for women. But the new analyses also tell us that maximizing the ring's potential means doing all that we can to effectively support women to use it consistently. And we must continue research to overcome the barriers to prevention for young women who face some of the highest rates of HIV infection in the world. So as the sponsor and the developer of the ring, we are now helping to support 2 open-label studies. Jared mentioned the HOPE study. IPM has also started the DREAM study, again, to look at the use of the ring when women know its safety and its efficacy. And IPM is also partnering with the Microbicide Trials Network on a separate study of the ring's safety and use among adolescent females and young women in Africa. And secondly, we are preparing to submit a ring dossier for regulatory approval mid-2017, and hopefully, with good luck, first approvals for the product could be potentially received in 2018. And if we look further ahead, the Depivirine ring has opened the door to new technology development, next generation products. In a few months, an even longer acting Depivirine ring, one that will be active for 3 months, will enter safety trials, along with a 3-month version of the ring, Depivirine ring that adds a contraceptive. And so we are able to pursue these strategies because of critical partnerships that have brought us to this point, especially the women who volunteered for the trials and their communities, the scientists, the donors, funders, industries, and advocates. If the ring is approved for use, it will be essential to build on these collaborations to ensure widespread access to it. Women and girls deserve the chance for a healthy future free of HIV. We must recommit to developing and delivering products that give them new and different ways to protect themselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zeda. Our next speaker is Judith Currier, who is from the David Geffen School of Medicine at the University of California, Los Angeles. And she's going to share with us some data that come from the large PROMISE study, which has been releasing results recently. And she's going to focus particularly on the data on the health of women after childbirth. And she will do this as a tandem presentation with her colleague Lynda Stranix-Chibanda, and between them they will cover the results of the PROMISE study. Over to you, Judith.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here on behalf of all the investigators involved in PROMISE. This is a multi-protocol, multi-component study that seeks to examine the optimal treatment for women during pregnancy, during breastfeeding, and thereafter. And so the study is divided into different parts. One component of the study was conducted in sites where formula feeding is the standard of care, and women who are on triple antiretroviral therapy during pregnancy. In 2008, when the study was designed, it was not known what was the optimal way to proceed after delivery in women with high T cells. The other component that my colleague Lynda Stranix-Chibanda will talk about is the breastfeeding component and what happens during breastfeeding. So focusing on women in countries where formula feeding was the standard of care, who were on triple antiretroviral therapy and had high CD4 counts at the time they started that therapy, these women, there were 1,652, were randomized to continue on antiretroviral therapy or stop and restart when their CD4 count fell below 350 or they had a clinical indication for ART. This population was young. The average age was 27, and the CD4 count was around 696, so very healthy. And over about 2.5 years of follow-up, the rates of AIDS-defining illnesses and serious non-AIDS events were very low and didn't differ between the groups. But the rates of so-called WHO 2 and 3 events, which include other types of infections, pulmonary TB, were half as common among women who stayed on ART compared to those who stopped. The safety between the two arms was similar. And so these results really confirm the benefits of continued ART after delivery in women with high CD4 cells, and support the rollout of option B plus or treatment for all, which is now underway. And Lynda will talk about our study and results on starting the ART across the components. Thank you.
Thank you, Joey. And indeed, it is an honor to be here on behalf of the protocol team for the Impact 1077 Promise Trial. And I'm going to talk about the postpartum breastfeeding component. That will be presented later on this week on Tuesday by Taha and Taha as a poster presentation. Now, this component was designed to examine the safety and efficacies of two different strategies to prevent transmission of HIV from the mom to the baby during breastfeeding. And these were women who did not meet the existing criteria to start ART for their own health, but needed a strategy to prevent transmission to their infant while they were pregnant, while they were breastfeeding. And the data here presented are from over 2,500 mother-infant pairs in about 8 countries in sub-Saharan Africa and India, where breastfeeding was the standard of care. These healthy women and their HIV uninfected babies were randomized after delivery to one or either of the two strategies. The first strategy was to give the mothers ART, and the drugs used were lopinavir, ritonavir, tenofovir, and entrectinib, or to dose their babies every day with infant nevirapine for the period of breastfeeding to prevent transmission. Now, both of these interventions had already been shown to work very well at preventing HIV transmission in the setting of breastfeeding. The women breastfed for about 15 months, and the major finding that we found was an extremely low rate of HIV transmission to the infant of 0.6% at 12 months of age. And that rate did not differ between the study groups. Importantly, there was no difference seen in maternal or infant safety events, and infant survival was very high at 98.9%. So these findings confirm that maternal ART is a safe and effective intervention to reduce HIV transmission through breastfeeding. Collectively, both these protocols provide the clinical trial evidence we needed in support of the treatment policies and programs. And moving on to a programmatic issue. Obviously, uptake of the ART is an important consideration for policymakers and programs. And while we were conducting the PROMISE study, a very important trial result was released from the START study group. And the START study showed that it was most beneficial for women and men to start ART early on before their immune systems became weakened. So when the START study results were released, the PROMISE team responded immediately to contact all the women on the PROMISE trial that were not currently on ART. All the women were given the information about the trial results, and those that were on ART had a strong recommendation to initiate ART for their own health. Good news is that over 5,000 women enrolled in PROMISE, 2,000 women accepted this offer and initiated ART immediately, citing the fact that they understood it was the best thing for their health, and they took up the recommendation of the study team to start. 1/3 of women who were not
great data now from looking at transmission and the effects of maternal treatment or prophylaxis in baby from the PROMISE study. Let's move on to our last presentation here this afternoon. And it's my pleasure to call on Kimberly Smith from ViiV to tell us the results from the area study and to hear what we can expect from auditing. Over to you.
Thank you. It is really my pleasure to speak to you on behalf of the healthcare of the RAS study team and the investigators in the RAS study and study participants. The RAS study was a open-label, randomized phase 3B study of treatment in women infected with HIV disease. It was to enroll 495 women who were treatment naive. They were randomized to a regimen of dolutegravir, abacavir, 3TC, and a fixed dose combination, which I'll refer to as the dolutegravir regimen, or azanavir, which is typically tenofovir, plus tenofovir FTC, which I refer to as the azanavir regimen. The study enrolled in approximately 12 countries around the world. The highest enrollment the highest enrollment country was the United States, with 134 individuals enrolled from the United States. And the second highest enrollment country was South Africa, with 66 women enrolling in South Africa. The average age of women enrolling into the study was 37. The average T4 cell count was roughly 375. The overall results of the study were that the dolutegravir-based regimen was superior to the azanavir regimen. The overall response in the primary endpoint at week 48 was the proportion of individuals with viral loads less than 50 copies. That occurred in 82% of women on the dolutegravir regimen compared to 71% of individuals on the azanavir regimen. And as I mentioned, that was statistically superior. That superiority was confirmed with a protocol analysis that showed 86% of women on dolutegravir and 76% on women on azanavir reaching undetectable viral load at week 48. That difference was driven primarily by both a lower rate of virologic non-response and a lower rate of discontinuation due to adverse events in the dolutegravir group. Importantly, individuals who failed the dolutegravir regimen developed no significant mutations to dolutegravir or any of the other components of the regimen. The overall rate of virologic non-response in the dolutegravir group was 6%. The rate of virologic non-response in the azanavir group was 14%. The rate of discontinuation due to adverse events for the dolutegravir group was 4% versus 7% in the azanavir group. Also importantly, there was a significant difference in the proportion of individuals who responded in the high viral load strata, and that was roughly 28% of the population. So in the viral load strata, for women who were above 100,000, the results for dolutegravir were 80% versus 64%. And as I mentioned, individuals who failed didn't develop any resistant mutations in the dolutegravir group, while in the azanavir group, there was one individual who developed the 184B mutation. So the overall results here, I think, are quite important for the field as we recognize that women are often underrepresented in HIV clinical trials, and so we are very committed to making sure that we contribute to the literature and that we improve the access to medications and information related to treatment of women who are infected with HIV disease. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kimberly. So we've heard in the course of this press conference a wide array of presentations about HIV risk, about PrEP, about treatment of mothers, and we've heard about new regimens to suppress virus. But I'd like to now open the floor to questions. If you just indicate with show of hands, and then we'll have somebody come and give you a microphone, and when you are introducing yourself, please say the name of media outlet you are representing, and then I'll take your questions. If a question on that particular presenter has already been asked, I'll take those questions right in after we've given at least one question to each of the presenters. Okay, so let's start us off, and shall we take you with the first question?
Thank you. My question is about there is some statistical robustness of these analyses. Am I correct that our post-hoc analysis will always be frequent?
These are exploratory analyses done to understand the relationship between adherence and HIV protection. They arise from the randomized trial, but they're exploratory, not after the trial.
Thank you. Right to the back.
First trying to follow TV. This question is for Lynda. Excuse my voice. Are you ready to regroup after the questions or as the counseling sessions occurred? And you got that 34% declining to accept the treatment going. Do you see that maybe it's something in the way you asked questions or presented the information that led to them make that decision? Really better to yourself or not? Judith?
I can try. Lynda was having trouble with the acoustics here. A really important point is that eventually many and almost all these women did go on therapy. This was the initial response. I'm glad you asked that question because it was just with one, here's the information, you want to start. There was an initial 34% to do uptake with one visit. And then after that, it increased over time. And so that's an important answer to asking.
Just to give you some idea how old this makes me feel when I see father television doing interviews with him for 20 odd years at every one of these conferences. So wonderful to see you guys. Oh, planting the flag 20 years later. Great to see you. Okay, so let's take a few more questions. Yes, go ahead, in the blue.
Hi, Sorry Cousins from the British Medical Journal. So my question is for Dr. Rosenberg. You mentioned that the first approval could be received by 2018. I'm just wondering if you have any idea of the costing of the ring, and given the fact that funding for HIV response is declining, if you have any idea of how it could scale up.
The cost of the initial launch at relatively low scale will be about $7 a ring. That's for a month use. With relatively little investment, we can get that down to $5 a ring. And at very high volumes, it can likely be under $2.50 a ring. The cost of the ring is quite low. It's really the cost of the silicone ring manufacturing. The question about resources is $1 million question, and we obviously will be looking to PEPFAR and the local fund and Medicaid and the usual suspects on this, but it's clear that the ring will have to be subsidized for the highest risk women.
Thank you. I'll take two more questions, one on each of the first and last presentations, if anybody has them. Okay. Karim?
Hi, my question is for Dr. Karim. The fact that you found bacteria in women's vaginas to create the milking exposure, what does this mean? Does it mean that HIV is just not so much just sexually transmitted, you just might get lucky and have the wrong kind of bacteria? And it's a very small sample size. Does it have any implications for other South Africans or women in Africa?
Thank you very much, Karim. Good question. So the first issue is that I think we're beginning to understand that HIV is very complex in the way in which it impacts women. That it's not simply a matter of behavior only, or biology only, but a combination of the two. So that the exposure that women have is a function of their choice of partners. It's a function of the age of the partners, for example. But once we're dealing with the issue of vulnerability, in combination with behavior, we've seen the potential importance of biology. We've seen the potential importance of the environment and all the bacteria that they have in the vagina. So what are the implications? Our study was the first to show this kind of relationship, so it needs to be confirmed. Is this a South African only phenomenon? Does this apply in Kenya? Does this apply in Malawi? We don't know that yet. This is very preliminary, early stage of understanding these results. We now need to extend those studies. We need to understand the influence that this organism may have in other settings, as even in other settings. Once we do, we then have the potential to identify solutions. And among the solutions lies the potential to be able to diagnose bacterial vaginosis. Peripheral is strongly associated with bacterial vaginosis. And there are many simple tests to be able to do that, and we can then treat bacterial vaginosis to look at its impact. Now, there have been some studies that have treated bacterial vaginosis to show no community level impact. And partly the reason for that would be the peripheral is only present in about 10 to 15% of women. But even though it's present in a small proportion of women, because of the strong association with HIV, its attributable risk is somewhere in the order of 30 to 40%. In our study, it turned out to be 41%. So it can account for the majority of HIV infections, but an important minority. So within those larger studies, we need to do the subgroup analyses to look at the impact on women who have tell us specifically. And I suspect that that will be an important next step in order to identify whether the intervention of treating bacterial vaginosis will impact on HIV. And indeed, we ourselves are changing the current protocol where we are introducing PrEP, in women in South Africa, that we will be changing the protocol to look at does diagnosis of bacterial vaginosis and the treatment, will it doesn't make a difference to PrEP efficacy. We won't know that answer until we complete those studies. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll take one more last question for Kimberly. This is a question specifically for Kimberly. Front row.
I just wonder what the advantages of whatever it is, the first regimen as opposed to the second. And if it was, it is a fixed dose single tablet, right, once a day, would that reduce the amount of the superiority results?
That's a good question. We are in the process of analyzing the question of superior appearance. It is more convenient, obviously, to have a single pill versus multiple pills. But what we saw here was not only a difference in virologic response, but in tolerability. And so it appears that this low-integrity regimen had a better safety profile than the boosted azacitidine regimen. And so it was a combination of factors that led to that superiority.
Thank you very much, Kimberly. We've heard just about another 2 or 3 minutes, so I'm opening the floor for additional questions. If you haven't asked a question, I'll give you first. If you aren't, then I see one individual has a question. Okay, you get the next question. Back to the blue and white type shirt. And then I'll come back to you for the last question.
Hey, thanks. I'm Lynda. I'm a physical journalist. And my question was also about the bacterial analysis. And I was wondering if that's something that is cut down on with voluntary analysis decision, or if that's unrelated. And I think, but that's not a healthy question.
So, Currier is not sexually transmitted. It is an organism found in a certain number of women. What happens in some women is that there's an imbalance in the vagina, where certain bacteria which normally predominate, particularly like in the skin and other bacteria, become more dominant and they start overgrowing instead of being in very small portions. So that's what we're seeing. It's not related to circumcision, and it's not related to sexually transmitted infections. Let's take the last question. Go ahead.
Medicine from Pediatrician, Dr. Smith, just two quick questions. First of all, what about that representation? How do you deal with that? And the secondly, these efficacy numbers seem to me to be lower than was seen the men only or the men predominantly clinical trials. Is that correct in that, or is so why?
So with regard to the first question about accurate hypersensitivity, so individuals in order to enter the study had to screen negative for HLA-B5701, and so as you know, that is a predictor of hypersensitivity reactions, and so we did not have anyone discontinue as a result of hypersensitivity reaction in the study. And then with regard to the overall results, it's in a similar range to other studies of combinations in women. And one of the things in this study that is maybe a little bit different than some other studies is that women who became pregnant in the study were withdrawn from the study, and where possible offered entry into a pregnancy study, although you take it back and you see that there were 2% of individuals in each arm who became pregnant, and so we discontinued as a result of that. So if you take that into account, it really gives you numbers that are comparable to other treatment-only studies on women.
So today is indeed a very auspicious day. Today we celebrate Mandela Day, for those of you not familiar with it. It is the day on which we remember what a great man he was. And for those of you who were here 16 years ago, you will know the impact he had in the global terrain of HIV infection when he closed his conference back in 2000. So it just remains me to let you know that the presenters in various studies, and I also want to just quickly let you know who did some of the recent studies. You have Aisha Sasani and Tulio just indicate who you are. And then in front here we have Brent Williams from Columbia University, and we have Nikki Pratt and Adam Bergener from the University of Washington and the Public Health Agency of Canada. Brent Williams did the Prevotola study, and the last two did the work by Bangladesh. So if you have questions about those studies, they will be waiting on the outside. If you have any of the speakers on the panel, you're most welcome to do interviews or to further ask any questions. Just make we thank our speakers, thank all of you, and enjoy a wonderful meeting that's coming up starting this evening. Thank you.